All right, let's talk some Illinois side of the FAU matchup with our guy, Joey Wagner. Joey, how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's been feels like this season's been a year already.
Yeah, this is a big game for this team to gain some confidence, but I think also for this fan base to gain some confidence because we know the schedule was difficult. But I predicted 1-2. I did not predict 1-2 to be this difficult or this not as encouraging. If that makes sense, I don't know if those words made sense.
I know what you're saying. I think obviously Kansas was the least encouraging of the whole lot of it, right? But I thought Penn State was more encouraging than I would have guessed a month ago.
Probably the first two games. Really, to be honest with you, Toledo, you were so close to losing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I left the stadium feeling better about Illinois Saturday than I thought I would. I mean, I wanted to say than any of the previous 2 weeks, which is of course. But then I thought I would. Offensively was a wreck, but I think there were so many things that just are unlikely to happen twice. 4 picks. But I think the way the defense turned around, and let's just call it what it is, you're not seeing a dual threat quarterback feels like it is the difference for this defense. And when that defense goes, everything else goes.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to go over, I got 6 topics. If we want to go beyond that, we'll do our pick to click. So have that in mind, Joey. Be working through that before we get out of here.
Always forget.
Yeah. I thought about it as I was mowing the grass this morning and I haven't thought about it since. So I haven't even picked mine. So no worries. The number one topic of this game is against Florida Atlantic. It's not about Florida Atlantic. It's about your quarterback, Luke Altmyer, who looked fantastic through 2 games. Made a couple mistakes, but bounced back from them. He fell into the Shane Falco quicksand. Joey doesn't understand that, but hopefully everyone else does. And he just could not bounce back from the mistake. He just kept making mistakes. Do you expect Luke Altmyer to bounce back?
Do you just bring up movie references just for a little reminder every week that I don't watch a lot of movies?
Maybe.
That's great. I hope you do. I deserve it. Yeah, I do expect Luke Altmyer to bounce back. Those first 2 games are more of a picture of who he is than that game against Penn State. The first pick he didn't see, the linebacker. That was the first one. The second one was an underthrow. And then after that, it felt forced. It felt like he was forcing that pass down the sidelines to third, and as we both agree, the most critical interception that he threw all game. And the fourth was got to do something. We're sinking here type of interception. I think he's too poised to have 2 of those back to back. I thought you phrased it better than I could have, or better than I did after the game. We said he had a month worth of struggles in 1 game. So yeah, I mean, 4 interception games just don't happen very often. They don't happen for Brett Bielema teams. They don't happen of all the places to not happen. They don't happen in Illinois very often. It's one of those things that I think getting him out of there when they did mattered. It's just to mentally shut it down, refocus. I think talent wins, right? Talent wins out. I think that's an easy one to say, hey, flush it and move along. What's that look like? I don't know.
Yeah.
And it might still include an interception or 2. Let's just be honest with each other here. But I don't think it'll be like a deflating 4 picks or 3 picks.
Yeah, kind of coming into this season, Tommy DeVito was unbelievable at avoiding those big mistakes, right? 5 interceptions and as many snaps as he had was ridiculous. I kind of expected double-digit interceptions this year. Those are the growing pains I expected. He's very close to that number already, but he can't think about that. Those don't matter anymore. It doesn't matter if at the end of the day, you're still one of the most picked off quarterbacks, because you will be. You'll be after a 4 interception game in week 3. That doesn't matter. What matters is you give your team the best chance to succeed the next game. And I've been really impressed with Luke. He is a thinker, right? So that can make you worry a little bit. Like Tommy DeVito, if he had a 4-pick game, I wouldn't have worried about him. I just think he has that kind of confidence in himself. This is very early in Luke Altmyer's career, his 5th game as a starter. So that's what we got to find out. I thought the first couple games we found out about his mental toughness because he did make some mistakes. He made one of those mistakes in each of the first 2 games, but he's able to bounce back from it and not make those mistakes again, albeit he wasn't playing Penn State. Now, FAU is not Penn State, so I think this is a nice bounce-back game for him. I think he can use his legs more in this game as long as he's fully healthy, which he got nicked up in that game with that low hit. But I just think he doesn't have to do too much. He was trying to do too much last week because he knew he was playing the number 7 team in the country. They were down 9. and they made a big play, and he wanted to get them within 2 points. And I think he was just trying to do too much. And then, 3rd and 19, dude, like you can't do anything. Like you're not going to be able to do anything. Maybe Barry Lunney should have just ran the ball there, right? And just took it out of his quarterback's hands and said, let's get out of here. Let's live to play another day. But I do think it's a big week for Barry Lunney Jr. and Brett Bielema. And the way they've handled it through us, at least, I think sounds encouraging because they're not hiding that Luke Altmyer had a bad game. No, the offensive line and receivers didn't play all that well, but Luke Altmyer had a bad game. And he has to accept that. They have to accept that and just make sure it doesn't happen again. I think they have to acknowledge that. They seem like they have, and then correct it. And I think I asked Barry Lunney, do you have to treat this week any differently than any week you have before? And of course, there's certain things, you got to address certain things, but you just find out what I did wrong and correct it. And we'll see if they can do that. I expect them to be better. I don't expect a 4 interception game again, but you do want them to have some success early. And I think that's up to Barry Lunney to figure that out. It's up to the offensive line to give him some running room, to get him up in good situations. So that I think that's going to be key early to see what Barry Lunney calls. If he calls a dinks and dunks, or does he just air it out right away to get his confidence back? That's what I'm interested to see.
Yeah, it's a really good point. This will be our first real visual evidence of what what Luke gets going with it, and that's a really good point. I also think it's going to help that they're probably going to run the ball. I don't expect them to get in a massive deficit. I think they'll be able to run the ball, and I think not putting everything on the shoulders of Luke Altmyer, which, let's be honest, it has been in these first 3 games, the way the games have played out. I think that'll help. We talked all offseason about the talent around him should help lift him, and I think this game, especially coming off what he's coming off of, will help him just kind of settle in and let Reggie Love and pick another running back. I'm sure we'll discuss that later, get going, and then just kind of let him manage it and just get some mojo back.
I think a good game for Luke Altmyer would be 1 turnover would be fine. If you have 1 turnover, that's fine. But just get back to your 60+% completion. Don't make any big mistakes and run the football a little bit. I think he's going to have a lot of opportunity to run the football. So just play within yourself. He doesn't have to beat FAU by himself. I would think he knows that.
Yeah, I think this is right. A turnover, a couple touchdowns, probably 180 passing yards, go with 40 rushing yards, right? Like that feels like a very Luke Altmyer, what they need out of him game, getting ready to really get into Big Ten play.
I'm going to say with the offense, okay? Barry Lunney made mention of this. He's made mention of it the last 2 weeks. Brett Bielema has made mention of it the last 2 weeks. I think I've asked about him the last 2 weeks, so maybe that's why. Why is this offense still searching for an identity, Joey?
I think it's because they haven't been able to run the ball effectively in the course of a game enough. I mean, I think Reggie Love should have had more than 12 carries in that game. That's just you could write off Toledo. You could write off Kansas as they got to get their quarterback to throw it around and get it in there. I just think they haven't been able to run the ball effectively. And we know, for as much as Barry Lunney likes the RPOs and all of this team's belief is rooted in running the football, and they've not done that enough to let everything play off of it like they need to. Some of that probably comes down to maybe Luke Altmyer needs to hand it off in some of these RPOs. Like there's probably a lot of factors, but I think the key is they've not been able to run well. The offensive line hasn't been consistent as run blockers. They've been in holes, whether it be the defense or just stalled offenses. If they can get that going, I think you'll see an identity start to take shape a little bit more.
Yeah, let's see. They have, I guess, 92 runs to 99 passes. That seems balanced, but it just hasn't been.
It doesn't feel like that.
Yeah, and part of that is the way they've gotten behind. Part of that's on the offense, but the defense really struggled the first 2 weeks. But I think it's a lot to do with the offensive line, Joey. This offensive line is struggling more than we expected to, whether it's getting that push in the run game, whether it's protecting Luke Altmyer. I think they thought this offensive line would be better than it is, because I think every week I had a C-, an F, and like a D- for this offensive line, or 2 Ds for this D in my position grades. I did not expect that for a group that's got Isaiah Adams, Julian Pearl, Zy Chrysler, and to be honest with you, just Bart Miller and Brett Bielema. Like, I know they had some recruiting issues. They've had to really recruit JUCO and transfers to kind of overcome that, but I still thought this offensive line would be better. This is a week to show that, because listen, FAU's got a pretty good defensive line, I think, for the American Athletic Conference. This is they're pretty good against the run. They are not that explosive. And this is a week that Illinois needs to get a push up front, really establish the run game. I have been encouraged at times the last 2 weeks. And what we've seen, listen, I think Penn State's one of the better defenses in the country. But I think this is the week you got to establish that. You've had a week where you changed. You've had a week where these guys are all together. Isaiah Adams, Zy Chrysler, maybe more comfortable now. But now it's time. The interior really needs to step up. I think Josh Kreutz has been really solid, but the guard play needs to improve. And Isaiah Adams, I think, will be really good. But this offensive line, before you get into Big Ten play and go up against Big Ten defensive lines week in and week out, they have to establish themselves. And then Barry, it's a big week for him. Just to script this. We had a great script. He had a great script against Toledo. Didn't work against Kansas. First drive did go pretty well against Penn State. But after the script, it just has never seemed to kind of just get into a rhythm. So I think that's on him. Like when the game doesn't go the way you plan, you still got to put together a plan that puts your players in position to succeed. So I think that's important for Barry. I do think his script is usually pretty good. It's been better more than not early in the game, but when the game kind of goes away from him, does he have the players to make up for a deficit? I'm not sure, but getting an early lead would probably help this team.
It would, and you're right. You look at those, you can go back. It's probably something I ought to do. Look at the third, fourth, fifth drives in those first 3 games, and it just feels like it hits a wall. And it's 3 and outs, or as we saw on Saturday, turnover. I mean, that doesn't, I guess it doesn't really at that point matter what your script is if you're having those turnovers. But I think that's exactly right, Jeremy. Those first drives, especially the last 2 weeks, you think, oh, maybe they've got something. Oh, no, it would have been the first week and the third week. The first drive against Toledo, remember how good that was? They had Isaiah Williams doing everything. They moved it against Penn State. But, yeah, I'm with you. It's a big week for Barry Lunney.
I think it's just, last week I thought, and you think about the Ryan Walters years, what they did, like they didn't care what the other team was doing. It was like, we are going to determine what you guys do. It just sometimes feels like Illinois' offense has not been that. And I think, is it the talent thing? Is it the offensive line? Is it the play call? I think it's a little bit of all those things, but they got to figure it out. And I think it does start with the run game. Like that's what their identity wants to be. Like, yeah, no, they don't want to be 2001 or 2006 Wisconsin, but I do think they want to mesh that spread RPO. Barry's got some really creative plays that I really like, but you got to be able to run the football to make those plays a little bit more surprising for the defense. And I think that's why just establishing that run game, man, if you could get a Josh McCray or Caden Fagan going in and give you some physicality, that would certainly help.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of my bigger questions going into this is who gets the second most carries at running back? Because I think, I hope I'm right in the sense that they're going to run more than they've run in these first 3 weeks. I mean, they just haven't sustained rushing with, again, the most egregious coming at Kansas they were moving it, right? And then they bring in Griffin Moore for that play, and you think, hey, just keep going with what's working. But who's the second back here, Jeremy? Because I think that's a fair question through 3 games of the season.
I agree. Be interesting to see if Caden Fagan gets 5 to 10, or if Josh McCray. This might be a game we try to get Josh McCray's confidence going, but I think the leash has got to be a little bit shorter here moving forward. But yeah, for Illinois to have 2 games under 30 carries is odd. That's pretty odd for this team.
What's the ideal breakdown for you? Like 17 for Reggie Love?
Well, you'd love to run 65, 70 plays in a game, right? I think for Reggie Love to get 15 to 20 is fine. If he's running it well, I think he's probably more of a 15 guy. And then Josh McCray gets a handful, Caden Fagan gets a handful, and Luke Altmyer needs to get involved. He needs to be involved in the run game because he is a really good weapon there. All right, let's move to defense here, Joey. Matthew Bailey, man, feel for this kid, out for the season. Only played 22 snaps in that game against Penn State. Had the shoulder injury that is going to require surgery, and he is out for the season. The one good piece of news is, I mean, he could have medically redshirted potentially anyway, but he will get a red shirt there. But Demetrius Hill, also out for the season. He's kind of physically similar to Matthew Bailey, but he was on the 3rd string, it seemed like. But still, they are thin at safety. How big of a blow are those 2 injuries to the Illini secondary?
Depth more than anything. It's a blow. And I say that knowing how good Matthew Bailey looked in his 22 snaps. I mean, he looked like a guy they'd been hyping up all offseason, like a difference maker back there in the secondary, like he had built on a really, really strong freshman year. But the reality is he's only played 22 snaps. So you don't have to, in 1 week, find a – I mean, he did start, right? But you have somebody who started those first 2 games. This isn't, oh, my goodness, you know, our starter for the first 3 games is out. You do have Clayton Bush, who started those games. So I think that helps in a weird way. Obviously, you would like to have Matthew Bailey back there, but to just be able to kind of revert back to what you did those first 2 weeks and rhythm-wise, routine-wise for Clayton Bush, that doesn't change. But depth-wise, kind of playing with fire a little bit. It's very, very cornerback-like down the stretch of last year where it's like one more injury, be it Miles Scott, be it Clayton Bush, you're looking at possibly Mac Resetic, a true freshman who's going to come in and get playing time. I know Brett Bielema mentioned his name along with Nicario Harper. So I think in terms of your starting personnel, you can survive it because you kind of survived the first you kind of didn't survive the first 2 games. But you have a guy who started games, but depth-wise, it's concerning.
Joey, if I quoted Adam Sandler, would you know the reference? Like, are you well enough aware of Adam Sandler movies to know?
I have enough of an idea.
With Clayton Bush, I just keep thinking of glad I called that guy. Because, I mean, we're kind of, they need another safety. Is Matthew Bailey still hurt? Are they not as high on Nicario Harper? I think it could be both those things. I think it ended up being both of those things. He had his best game against Penn State, but Matthew Bailey was noticeably more impactful against the run than any of the other safeties. And his ability, I mean, his size, he was taking on blockers, on offensive line. That's why he got injured, is he took on an offensive lineman and got piled on the first play, but he made a great play. And then he made another great play at the goal line, taking on, I think it was Olu Fashanu. He was great setting the edge, getting his gap. And that had been a huge issue through the first couple of weeks, was some of the safety run fits weren't very good. They're going to miss that. They don't have that. But I did think Clayton Bush played really well last week. He was physical. He's not as big as Matthew Bailey, but I thought he played well. But now this is where Nicario Harper is going to have to step up now. Former FCS All-American, transfers to Louisville, did not really play there at all, which is why there were some question marks when they got him. But now he's the guy that's rotated in here recently. If there is an injury to Clayton Bush, Nicario Harper's your guy, and then Mac Resetic is right there. So, I thought Matthew Bailey could have really helped this defense and given me even more confidence about them moving forward. I think I got confidence in this defense moving forward because of the front. But if you had Matthew Bailey, I think this team would have been really strong against the run. But yeah, just can't afford many more injuries, man. But good thing you did address this position in the transfer portal. We'll see what Clayton Bush and Nicario Harper have moving forward.
Yeah, I don't want to minimize the best way. Like, you don't want to minimize the loss of Matthew Bailey. He's a good football player. Somebody who's probably going to have a chance to make money doing this. But I think the best way I can put it is like, you're not in scramble mode right now to try to find a replacement. It doesn't make up for the loss of Matthew Bailey, but it helps ease that, where you've got a guy who's kind of been there and done that.
Sticking with the defense, will Illinois have a top 10 pick for a second straight year, Joey? And I'm talking about Johnny Newton following Devin Witherspoon, of course.
It's a good question. I just looked. PFF has him as 7 on their big board. Matt Miller at ESPN has him number 1 among defensive tackles. He has been, Jeremy, we're old enough to remember the alarm sounding after the Toledo game in the fan base that he was reading press clippings and whatever other unbelievable narratives were being thrown out there about him. But dude, he's been straight up dominant. He was the best player on the field on Saturday against Penn State with a lot of pros.
By far.
A lot of pros. And he is maybe, I don't know. I mean,
you talked to him today, right?
I did. And he said, let me scroll up here. I can't click. You get mad at me when I click.
No, you can click. Just don't do it while I'm talking to you. Just
all I want to show is dominance every play. Someone who's unblockable, check, that I'm one of the best prospects in the draft and doing whatever I can to help this team win. Check. Right? I mean, it seems a lot like he's done all of those things. And there was Aaron Henry mentioned it. Terrence Jameson, when I talked to him yesterday, mentioned it. they said they did a study, and I really wish I'd followed up more about this. He's better as the game goes on. Okay, it's fun and games.
I bet everyone else gets worse. I think he doesn't get.
That's probably right.
He doesn't get worse, and the other offensive linemen do, so he gets better.
Well, Johnny was asked about that, and he said, as the game keeps going, I start to get a feel for everything, and it starts to slow down for me in a sense. I can tell which plays are coming, and I'll yell out their plays before they even snap the ball. That's very on brand for Johnny Newton. Yeah. Feels like everything starts to slow down for me, and once the game keeps going, I just keep getting hotter and hotter.
Well, notice these are the PFF snaps, according to PFF, the snaps for Johnny Newton. 58 the first week against Toledo. Notably, I think Seb McConnell had 30. Bryce Barnes had 30. Kansas, 62. Penn State, 74. They could have taken him out. Brett Bielema or Aaron Henry, was it? Said he didn't want to come out. And maybe he was just having such a good game. He's like, man, I'm going to keep working in front of these scouts. But I think it's just he wanted the defense to succeed. He wanted to keep Illinois in the game. And I think you don't need to take him off the field that much. I think he is built different. Sure, you worry a little bit towards the end of a season, but, man, they need to win games. And I would expect Johnny Newton to play 90% of the snaps moving forward because he's so good and he doesn't get worse.
I asked Terrence Jamison about that. I said, what's the balance when you're being cognizant of his snaps, but also he's the best player on the football field, and he's right now giving you the best chance to win. And he brought up that study, and he said we want to manage him and keep him fresh, but he's a guy who improves as the game goes on. He gets a feel for it, gets a feel for his matchup. It plays to his advantage. Yeah, I think as it gets less brutally hot, maybe those concerns will ease up. I know that was some of the conversation after Toledo and Kansas, whether it's very, very warm as it typically is.
It'll be warm this weekend. Saturday's going to be hot.
But I just – the production's there. You can't interrupt the production of what he does and the impact he has on your football team. So it's hard for me to think that heavy hockey sub-rotation that we saw mostly in week one will continue.
To answer the question for me, I don't know if he's a top 10 pick because he's an undersized 3 technique. He doesn't have the Leonard Williams length. He does not Jalen Carter quite built, but production-wise, I mean, he's got a chance at, the Outland Trophy for the best interior lineman. He's got a chance at that. He's better than Kalijah Cansey, in my opinion. And Kalijah Cansey was a top 20 pick. So if you told me, will they have a top 20 pick in back-to-back years? I think so. I do. I really do. With the way he's playing, if he continues this level of play in Big Ten play, and I think he will, and what he did to Penn State was just ridiculous. Just ridiculous. We broke it down with Jay Lehman's film room. His get off, his strength, his technique is just phenomenal. So I don't know if he's going to be top 10 just based on the position and some of his measurables, but he's one of the best football players in the country. So Illinois got that for him moving forward. And I do think this week against FAU with him, Seth Coleman, Gabe Akis, if Keith Randolph's healthier, I think those guys can have a chance for a really big game because Clemson had a really big game against them. It's a pocket passer, Joey, who happens to be 5'10". Offensive line, I think, can be solid in the American Athletic Conference. It's probably the worst offensive line they've played so far this year. So what they did up front, Johnny Newton did against Penn State, FAU, if they play that way, I think it's going to be a monster day for that front 5.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've been sitting here trying to find his stat by quarter. That's not going to happen. But, yeah, I feel confident saying he's a first-round draft pick, which doesn't feel like even a hot take or a take. It just feels like that's just the reality of what's going to happen. Top 20 feels like top 10. I mean, there was a point in early November we didn't know if Devin Witherspoon was going to be a top 10 pick, right? I mean, so there is still so much time that can happen, but it does feel like he got that buzz late last season, and it feels like he's really getting a lot of that right now.
All right, 2 more left to go. Will we see a complete game from the Illini finally, Joey?
I think so. I mean, if you're Illinois and you want to go bowling and you want to be able to build on last year, you should be able to put a complete game together against Florida Atlantic and a team that's in the early stages of Tom Herman's a very good coach, but in the early stages of his tenure there, of his rebuild there, of him putting his foot or thumbprint on that program. So there's really no reason, if you want to go where you want to go, and having come out of that schedule that may well include 3 conference championship game participants, Kansas would be the one that you would maybe say, well, obviously Penn State, but yeah, you should be able to be better coming out of that against this program.
Needs to be. It needs to be. You're more talented. You have high expectations. It needs to be. Like, you have higher paid coaches, all of it. Like, this is actually like a bigger game for Illinois than FAU when you think about it. Not win or loss, but just to get some confidence in yourself, get some confidence outside the program. But I mean, FAU, this is a bye game. They're gearing up for American Athletic Conference play for the first time, as they went up a level, right? For Illinois, and of course, FAU is going to play hard. They're going to try and pull off the upset. They almost did to Purdue last year, so they can play free. Illinois has kind of got some pressure. There's some nervousness about it, but this is a game they need to dominate. Like, if they don't win by 3+ scores or possessions, I think that'd be concerning. Like, I respect FAU as a program. I respect Tom Herman, but this is a rebuild. They have injuries already, and they do not have the talent Illinois has. They have some players like LaJohntay Wester, big fan of him, the wide receiver. Their running back, if healthy, Larry McCammon's pretty good, but this is a game where if you feel like even in the Big Ten West, like, you need to handle your business here and play a complete game. And that's not the players, but I think it's a big one for the coaching staff. So I liked what I saw from Aaron Henry for the offensive side. I think it's a big week. Number 2, or last one here. Will Brett Bielema be aggressive in the transfer portal more next offseason? I brought this because this was kind of a conversation we were having before the press conference. And I thought this is a worthy conversation long-term to discuss.
Yeah, he needs to be at a few key positions. Defensive line, really, right? I mean, maybe offensive line.
Well, let's recap, because outside of quarterback, he hasn't gone heavy at Power 5 guys, going to get Power 5 guys in the portal. He's kind of gotten these under the radar guys. We've asked him about that. He doesn't make a differentiation. He just looks for players, whatever it is. But a lot of these guys are coming up from lower levels, and I think that can help your depth. I think next year they're going to need some big playmakers, especially on the defensive line, potentially the offensive line. Do they need to go find another running back or wide receiver? We'll see. Probably need some safety help next year. But yeah, that's just to set up the conversation. Go ahead, Joe.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think that's the ideal approach for Brett Bielema. I think we agree he wants to be a development program, and he wants to build from within and supplement his roster, which we've largely seen him do via the portal, via junior college. But I also think you and I have talked to Brett Bielema enough, understand the importance of stacking seasons on top of each other, continuing to push this forward. Brett Bielema is a rationally confident person. And I do believe that they believe in their development, and I think you've seen that bear fruit. But I also don't think he's so heels dug in that he wouldn't go elsewhere if he thought that's what this team needed to continue to build forward, even if he may not entirely love the idea of that.
I don't see Brett Bielema going into the portal and grabbing 15 guys from Power 5 programs who all have their individual agendas. I do think you can be aggressive, especially with guys who are making NIL right now. I agree with their approach of NIL. When you're retaining Johnny Newton, that is far better than any transfer you can get, even if it doesn't get the headlines. Like, keeping those players is really important, and it will be moving forward, right? So keeping your stars in your program, keeping them from transferring, maybe keeping them for an extra year. As Illinois basketball has done well, Illinois football has done well. That is really, really important. More important than probably most of the portal stuff. But you will lose Johnny Newton. You will lose like a Keith Randolph, and you are losing Isaiah Adams and Julian Pearl and potentially Isaiah Williams, right? Like, you still need, I think you can pick and choose your spots, right? So I don't think Illinois is going to get into a lot of bidding wars, but I do think like there's going to be some needs that I don't think are going to be able to be filled with your prep recruiting yet next year. If you want to be competitive against what we think is a tough schedule, whenever that schedule comes out, but if they don't change what they originally, or I guess the second time they put out, it's going to be a really tough schedule. So I think they got to go get some D-line guys who are going to start for them. Like, no doubt. And we're former high level targets. And maybe now you're to the point, Joey, where you've recruited some of those guys as high school guys, right? To where you know who they are. You still got to do a lot of research because we've seen some programs that go heavy in the transfer portal. It can blow up, because you don't have the heavy word culture built into the program. And that is so important to Brett Bielema.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's part of why he wants to build through their development and their recruiting. But that's just kind of where the timeline is right now in terms of what you're going to need. And we talked about it. I'm a big believer in maximizing your best pitch. And this offseason, at that moment in time, your best pitch is defensive line. Because you're probably going to have a first-round draft pick in Johnny Newton. I think you and I are in agreement that Keith Randolph will probably be selected at some point in the draft, or he will no doubt be in a training camp come next fall. That's a pitch. That is a very, very great sell. And, oh, by the way, you've got a ton of snaps to tell somebody that they can come in. You can get the development. You can get the snaps. Is it something that I don't want to speak for Brett Bielema. Would he do cartwheels about the thought of having to get in the portal? Probably not. But I think he knows what it is. And I think he knows the importance of not having that down year in your third real breakthrough, kind of building on that. If this is year 5 or 6 with him.
Yeah.
And you've gone to bowl games 3-4 times in a row, maybe I would feel differently, but I think he understands the early stages of having to get this going and maintained and keeping that foot on the gas. I could be wrong. Well, I know he's very pragmatic about a lot of that.
And the other thing we got to keep in mind, the Big Ten ain't getting easier because I saw Brandon Marcello's top 30, and 6 of his top 10 were teams that are in the Big Ten next year because Washington, Oregon, and USC are all in there. Right. So like you gotta have talent. You gotta have talent. You gotta add it in multiple ways. And I will give Lovie Smith this. Like, he found talent in the portal. Like, that's how they increased their level of talent. You got to find the right guys, of course, and you got to continue to not have it be a problem of outsiders coming in. You got to be careful with that. But I do think, to answer the question, I do think he's got to get a little bit more aggressive this offseason, especially depending on like if it's 6-6 or if it's 5-7. Probably going to be a little bit more desperate for that. But I do think you want to continue competing in the Big Ten. You got to have that talent. All right, FAU, Joey, who's your pick to click on offense?
I know the defensive front is better probably than they might get credit for being in their conference. I just feel like Reggie Love is getting closer and closer every game. I think this is going to be his most opportunities of the season because I think they're going to be very committed to running the football. He's shown he can be productive in that. I think another week with the offensive line at their spots, we are assuming there are no changes. We will find that out prior to the game. It feels like a Reggie Love, hey, carry this thing 15, maybe 20 times, get this thing moving, be our stabilizer, and let's just be a very business-like win.
All right, if I wanted to win this, I'd pick Isaiah Williams because he's going to be the guy that probably gets the most yards on this team every week. If I wanted to go kind of under the radar, I'll go Tip Ryman. I think he needs to be targeted more, Joey. I think getting him involved in that flat, I think is good for Illinois.
You're going Altmyer, aren't you?
Oh, I'm going with the storyline. Luke Altmyer bounced back. Yeah, I believe in the kid. I believe in the kid until he puts another one together like that. Like what I saw the first 2 weeks was legit, and I think he just had a bad day. So I think Luke Altmyer bounces back in a big way, both with his arm and with his legs. Just doesn't have to do too much. So I'll go with Luke Altmyer. Defense.
What are the metrics here, by the way, for each of our picks?
If Reggie goes 80-plus yards and a touchdown, I'd give it to you.
Okay.
Right? I think we know what a Luke Altmyer good game looks like. If Illinois gets 30-plus points, Luke Altmyer's probably having a good game.
Yep, that's right.
All right. Defense, I'll pick first. Big game for Xavier Scott. Well, Jonte Wester, I'm a big fan of. Their slot receiver, Xavier Scott, and that nickel is going to be really, really important. So I would imagine he's going to play mostly nickel as he has this year. I think it's a big game for Xavier Scott to limit LaJonte Wester, who's the only guy. McCammon, when he plays, is good. They're running back. Kobe Lewis is a Purdue transfer who got nicked up too. But I just think The defensive front's going to give Illinois, their secondary, some chances, but I think Xavier Scott just limiting LaJohntay Wester will be important because he's had 2 100-yard games back-to-back at 100 yards and 3 touchdowns last year against Purdue. If you can keep that guy who usually gets like 10 touches a game, if you can keep him under 70 yards, that'd probably be a pretty good job by Xavier Scott.
I am in the middle of deciding if I want to change my answer because FAU is kind of between a rock and a hard place here. You're with the backup quarterback, which in an ideal world, you would probably try to rely on a run game. Yeah. On the road against a Power 5 team, try to get some things going on the ground. But you're going up against a defensive front that has been playing much better lately. And I just don't know how married you'll be to the idea of running the ball. So my initial pick, Clayton Bush, I have moved on from as you spoke. I'm going to go with Taz Nicholson. I think he's likely
going for a pass rusher here, which I think this is the week.
I know.
Piece. But I like the Taz. I went with Taz last week.
I think he's been better probably than maybe we think. The penalties have really skewed what those first 2 games had looked like. It wasn't perfect on Saturday.
Great in coverage.
Yeah, they don't target him a lot. You'll see Xavier Scott has far and away the most targets on this team. The teams don't seem to have a lot of interest in throwing the way of Taz Nicholson, which isn't to try to make him out as the best cornerback in the Big Ten. It's just a reality. They're not really targeting him particularly often.
Just to give you the numbers, against Taz Nicholson, 5 receptions on 8 targets for 40 yards, no touchdowns, an NFL passer rating of 75. His only issue this year is tackling kind of in space and the penalties. But kudos to the Illinois defense last week. 0 penalties last week for the defense.
Now that we say all of this, a pass rusher probably would have made a great deal of sense here, wouldn't it have? Seth Coleman, Gabe Backus. I'm not changing now. Whatever.
I mean, we could go with Johnny, but that just seems like it's cheating every week.
At some point, we are going to not be able to pick him.
I think we shouldn't be able to pick him.
Okay, then we can't pick Isaiah either. Let's just take one off the board on each side.
Okay, that's fine. Because Isaiah Williams is probably good for 60 yards a game, and Johnny's good for how many pressures? Handful every game. I like those.
An absurd amount of pressures. It is truly like, what do you have? 7 against Penn State?
And that felt low.
Do you remember against Indiana? I think it was 7, maybe it was 9 against Indiana a year ago.
He had 10 in one game. I got PFF in front of me.
And that was like shaking the earth. Oh my God.
10.
And now he gets 7 against the number 7 team in the country. And it's kind of like, we all agree it was a very, very good game. In fact, probably one of his best at Illinois. But it's just kind of, that's what he does. 5+ pressures a game and just is a general nuisance for offense.
His early season stretch, 10 Indiana, 7 Virginia, 8 Chattanooga. Had 6 against Nebraska, 6 against Northwestern.
This feels like a very Newton stretch of 3 games coming up, by the way. FAU, Purdue, Nebraska feels a lot like the conversation around him could get much, much louder in the next month.
I loved Seth Coleman last week. I thought he had a great game. Gabe Backus showed up. Obviously got the sack. Johnny had a big impact on that one. But I thought he was so strong against the run. I thought those guys were way better. It's time for those guys to break out. It is really time for those guys to break out. If they're NFL prospects, it's time. And you hope Keith's healthy, because healthy Keith Randolph could have been a pick to click too, because he just hasn't been. He was clearly not as healthy last week, but boy, he battled.
Just to clarify, Brett Bielema said during the Kansas game, he took a hit to his shin, which had kind of limited him in some capacity. It almost sounded like it was maybe a question as if he would be able to go against Penn State. He obviously did. So when we say healthy, that's what we mean, right?
Yeah, he played for like 60+ snaps against Penn State. So kudos to Keith for doing that. All right, one last thought. Illinois has had some flip candidates on campus so far this year. Dylan Stevenson, 4-star edge rusher out of Florida, who's committed to Stanford, was on campus the first game. Then you had Jaquan Bostic, who's committed to West Virginia. Neil Brown on the hot seat. They're 2-1 to start. Did have a conference win, I believe, last week against Pitt, I believe it was. So he was on campus. And then this week, Alan True just reported Andrew Dennis, who, when I did my offensive line focus back in the winter, was like the top priority target I had listed there. But Michigan State offered, they locked him down. Of course, Michigan State is without its coach, and that should be official anytime soon. But Yeah, Illinois getting aggressive with these guys. And Andrew Dennis is someone they had a really good relationship with. Bart Miller's done a good job. Obviously, their history of developing offensive linemen is good. He's gotten offers from Purdue, Penn State here recently, Stanford offer. Like he's gotten a slew of Power 5 offers with the Sharks circling Michigan State recruits right now, Joey. But that's a big one. So Illinois still got some potential big targets they can get. And remember, last year, the last couple of years, some of their best targets have been flip guys. So something to watch for.
Yeah, two things I want to bring up with that. 4-star offensive lineman, he would, that we don't know what's going to happen with him, but that would be a pretty nice fall addition to the offensive line haul and probably move Eddie Turk to defense.
I texted you and Ryan Easterling. He'd be the best offensive line prep guy I think they've gotten during Brett Bielema's time here. He reminds me a lot of Isaiah Adams, but he's just long, strong, physical, good pass sets. He's a complete offensive line prospect. I think can play tackle or guard, but I do think he can play tackle at the next level.
So we do our over-unders every week, and there's one that was submitted. We're not going to do it because it's 0.5 flips. I'm not going to do that for this week because it's just too much going into it. We have to be logical about it. But I want to change that number from between now and the first signing period to 1.5.
1.5.
And see where you land.
I'd go over 0.5. I don't think I don't think I'm willing yet to go 1.5.
I don't.
They did last year. They did last year with Elsie and Colin Dixon.
Now, Dixon was helped by the coaching change at Wisconsin.
Sure.
But as we just discussed, we don't know what's going to happen at West Virginia. I think there's a long time, Jeremy, until, and I know right now
that's not a bad number because that's not a bad number because there's probably another guy that they're going to have on campus or two, and there will be coaches fired, right? That we aren't thinking about. They were going to have another kid on campus. I wrote about on the VIP board that's coming to another Big Ten program with a coach on the hot seat. So that's not a bad number, Joey. But I like them being aggressive there.
I make them. I would feel confident picking one. And that we say that we don't have we're just waiting for this to announce. I just think that's the history of this coaching staff. One would make sense. But I do think we'll see some coaching changes around college football. And it's the point is, probably the best way to put it is this coaching staff has proven that they keep pushing until they're told not to firmly no by a prospect, but they keep those relationships. I remember when Colin Dixon ultimately reopened and committed, they know when and where to push the gas on guys, how to do it, and how to maintain those relationships rather than just hanging up when you get a call the first time that it goes the other way.
Yeah, well, Brett Bielema, he's publicly said this. When a kid calls him up to say he's committing elsewhere, he says, hey, if anything changes, let us know. We still would love to have a chance to coach you. And usually they ask, do you want us to keep recruiting you? And if they say, sure, they keep going. And that's what they've done with Dylan Stevenson. Obviously, they're doing it with Jaquan Bostic and now Andrew Dennis. So I think that's really important, not to burn bridges and be like, oh, you didn't commit to us, you're dead to us, right? Keeping that relationship.
They've shown a willingness to be flexible in their initial class thoughts, too, in terms of their breakdown. I think that's a huge, huge, huge thing. Now, if Malik Elsie tells you he wants to flip, it sure doesn't matter what your numbers were a month ago. You're going to find a way. But I think we've seen that with the James Croops late. They are flexible in changing their plans for the right guy. And I think if you get someone on campus, in my mind, that tells me that they believe he's the right guy.
All right, we'll have our over-unders later in the week, Joey. I do not know what our VIP members have submitted, but I'm going to throw a couple at you, okay?
Okay.
The FAU game. Caden Fagan carries 4.5.
Yeah, pretty close to one of the submissions. Over. I am in. Jeremy, I've sat there every week and said, hey, you probably should see this kid. Yeah. And let's be honest, Josh McCray has struggled to get going. And Caden Fagan is very similar physically to Josh McCray, and he ran in very limited snaps. I thought he ran well. He ran hard. He fell forward. He got productive yards. FAU would open the door for him.
Okay. Snaps for Malik Elsie.
What was it, 20 some odd?
It was 35, I think, last week, but that was the game out of hand.
Could be the same way this week, though, and the other way, right?
You would hope so. So I'm going to set Malik Elsie over under snaps at 28.5.
I think over. I feel like it's time for Malik Elsie. Here I am going over on the two freshmen because I think it's time, and I think we've seen enough of a body of work to believe that it's time. Would you go over?
I would go over on, especially. Yeah, I go over on both. I think they know they just need more talent out there, and I think it's an opponent you should be able to do it. I do not expect them to start. I do not expect Pat Bryant to be benched or Josh McCray not to have an opportunity. But I do think these guys need to get a couple more reps because I think you're going to need them this year, and I think their talent is flashed at least. Should I do a Kanari Wilcher?
I'm going to take the under.
Yeah.
There's just too much traffic in front of him with Isaiah Williams and Hank Beatty.
Yeah. I just like his speed. They need some speed out there. Ashton Hollins catches 0.5.
I kind of laughed internally when we got that one last week, and boy, is my face red now.
2023 Deuce Spann, man.
It's just because the way I think the game could go, I think over because he's fast and he does things and he's super intriguing.
Yeah, really intriguing for the long term. All right, I think that's it. I think that's all I got for you. You got any random ones? Any random things before we get out of here?
I did see, and we'll answer the VIP. I don't care about sharing this one. 2.5 quarterbacks. 2.5 different quarterbacks to take a snap.
For both teams or just Illinois?
For Illinois, which is the easy under, right?
I will go under on that one. Thank you.
Now, but that being said, I thought maybe we'd see Donovan Leary for the back half of the fourth quarter against Penn State.
Yeah. John Paddock got some great stats on that last drive, though.
He did after a generously described rocky first start. First drive, rather.
Yeah. No quarterback controversy here. Not on this podcast.
Shouldn't be anywhere.
No, I don't believe so.
At any point, ever.
Joey Wagner. Thank you, buddy.